there's one thing I've learned in my 27 years of life, it's that secrets are like shadows. They follow you everywhere, growing larger as time passes. Mine was a secret I carried alone for 2 years, and when it finally came to light, it shattered everything I thought I knew. My name is Tiana, and this is the story of how a single night changed my life forever. It was my best friend Tiffany's birthday party, a small gathering at a rooftop lounge in Lekki. I wasn't in the mood to go out, but Tiffany insisted. "Tiana, you need this. You've been cooped up for too long. Come and have fun for once." Reluctantly, I agreed. The night started off slow, casual conversations, laughter, and the sound of Afro beats pumping in the background. But then he walked in. He was tall, with dark skin that seemed to glow under the lights. His smile was disarming, and his presence commanded attention. He introduced himself simply as David, no last name. And just like that, he became the center of my night. We started talking, and within minutes I was captivated. He was charming, funny, and intelligent. He told me he was visiting Nigeria from the UK, where he lived and worked. We danced, laughed, and talked until the early hours of the morning. When the party ended, I wasn't ready for the night to be over. And neither was he. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was waking up in his hotel room the next morning. But when I turned over to say good morning, he was gone. At first, I thought maybe he had stepped out for breakfast, but as the hours passed, it became clear he wasn't coming back. I tried calling the number he had given me, but it didn't go through. Just like that, David vanished, leaving me with nothing but memories of a magical night. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. The shock was indescribable. I wasn't ready to be a mother, especially not under these circumstances. I didn't even know David's last name, let alone how to find him. After days of agonizing over what to do, I decided to keep the baby. I told my mom, who was disappointed but supportive. To everyone else, I gave a vague story about the father being a man I had briefly dated who left the country unexpectedly. It wasn't entirely a lie. Being a single mother was harder than I ever imagined, but Timmy made it all worthwhile. He was the most beautiful baby, with a curious nature and a smile that could light up a room. Every day I poured all my love and energy into him. Still, there were moments when I wished I could give him a father. Moments when I felt the weight of my secret pressing down on me. My cousin Sandra had always been more like a sister to me. She lived abroad and only visited Nigeria occasionally, but we kept in touch through calls and social media. When she announced she was coming to Nigeria with her new husband, I was excited, but nervous. They had gotten married in the UK, but the marriage was done hush-hush, and not even a picture of who she was marrying was made available to us who were more of an extended family. I feel it might have been that way because Sandra got pregnant, and the wedding was rushed so as to cover what felt to the family like a shame. Sandra was the kind of person who noticed everything. I knew she would ask questions about Timmy's father, and I wasn't ready to explain. At first, everything seemed fine, but then Sandra showed me a picture from their wedding. The moment I saw the picture, my heart stopped. It was him, David, or at least someone who looked exactly like him. My mind raced. Could Daniel be the man from that night? I tried to act normal, but my unease was obvious. Over the next few days, I avoided Daniel as much as possible, but Sandra noticed. "Tiana, is something wrong? You've been acting strange," she said one evening. I shook my head. "I'm fine, just tired." But I wasn't fine. I was spiraling. The truth came out during a family dinner. Sandra was showing old pictures of Daniel, and I blurted it out without thinking. "I know him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Everyone turned to look at me. "What do you mean you know him?" Sandra asked, her tone sharp. I couldn't bring myself to look at Daniel. "He's Timmy's father." The room erupted into chaos. Sandra was screaming, Daniel was protesting, and I was in tears. "This is ridiculous," Daniel shouted. I've never met her in my life. But the resemblance between him and Timmy was undeniable. The weeks that followed were an emotional battlefield. Sandra had moved into a hotel, taking Daniel with her, and refused to answer my calls or texts. My mom, though heartbroken, kept telling me to give Sandra time. She'll come around, she said, but I wasn't so sure. The family WhatsApp group was flooded with cryptic messages and passive-aggressive quotes from Sandra. One read, "Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those you trust the most." Another said, "Some people hide daggers behind their smiles." I knew they were aimed at me, and every word stung. My mom, ever the peacemaker, decided to call a family meeting to clear the air. It was held at our family house, the same place where this entire mess had started. The atmosphere was tense as everyone arrived. Sandra and Daniel walked in, their expressions a mix of anger and exhaustion. My mom sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "We're family," she began, "and families don't fall apart like this. We need to talk this out." Sandra cut her off. "Talk? What is there to talk about? My cousin slept with my husband." "I didn't know he was your husband," I snapped, the frustration spilling over. "Oh, so that makes it okay," Sandra shot back. Daniel raised his hands. "Can we all calm down? For the 100th time, I didn't sleep with her. And yet your face is staring back at me every time I look at her son," Sandra yelled. The argument went in circles with no resolution in sight. Every time I tried to explain my side of the story, Sandra shut me down. Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear, while my mom's attempts to mediate fell flat. Eventually, Sandra stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Daniel followed after her, leaving the rest of us in awkward silence. A few days later, I decided to clear my head with a walk through the neighborhood. I was deep in thought when I noticed an older woman staring at me from across the street. "Tiana, right?" she calls out. I nodded, though I didn't recognize her. She crossed the street and introduced herself as Mama Doris, one of Daniel's relatives. "I heard about the drama," she said, her tone sympathetic, "and I think I know what's going on." Curious, I invited her to sit with me at a nearby cafe. Over cups of steaming tea, she told me a story that sent chills down my spine. When Daniel was a boy, his family went to their village for Christmas. Mama Doris began. One afternoon, he and his twin brother went to the market with their nanny. Somehow, the twin got separated from them. By the time they realized he was missing, it was too late. He was gone. My heart sank as I listened. "They searched for years," she continued. "Police, private investigators, everything. But there was no trace of him. Eventually, they had to accept he was gone." I felt a mix of relief and dread. This explained so much, but it also meant the man I had met that night, the father of my son, was still out there somewhere. "Does Daniel know about this?" I asked. Mama Doris hesitated. "Not exactly. His parents never told him the full story. They didn't want him to grow up feeling guilty or incomplete." Armed with this new information, I decided it was time to talk to Daniel directly. I showed up at the hotel where he and Sandra were staying and asked to speak to him alone. He was hesitant, but eventually agreed. "Daniel," I began, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out." I explained what Mama Doris had told me, watching his face shift from confusion to disbelief. "I don't have a twin," he said firmly. "You do," I replied, "and I think he's Timmy's father." Daniel was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "If this is true, we need to find him." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Daniel confronted his parents, who reluctantly confirmed the story. They provided old photographs and documents that might help in the search. With the help of a private investigator, we began piecing together David's life. It turned out he had been adopted by a family in another state and given a new name. He had grown up unaware of his origins, but a recent DNA test had revealed he wasn't biologically related to his adoptive family. When we finally tracked him down, the resemblance to Daniel was uncanny. David was stunned to learn about his twin brother, and even more shocked to learn he had a son. The reunion was emotional, but bittersweet. David apologized for disappearing after our one-night stand, explaining that he had panicked and didn't know how to handle the situation. Sandra, while initially furious, eventually came around. It's not his fault, she admitted, and it's not yours either, Tiana. The family began to heal, though it took time. Daniel and David started building a relationship, and I worked on repairing my bond with Sandra. Today, Timmy has 2 uncles who adore him. While the journey to get here was messy and painful, it brought our family closer in the end. And as for me, I've learned that secrets may cast long shadows, but the truth has a way of shining through.